Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey of the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China. And today we have a question from Vaniac17, who just happens to be my first openly female subscriber who has asked a question. Now, it's no secret that 1% of my viewers and subscribers are females, so you are part of the 1%. So the question is about an upcoming Taekwondo tournament. She has a tournament coming up this weekend, so I hope this video isn't coming too late. And she is nervous about the tournament. Now, it's not her first tournament. She's done this before, but she knows that she gets nervous. And she's especially nervous for the weapons forms portion of the tournament because when she gets nervous, her hands tend to shake. And obviously that makes it look bad when you're handling weapons and trying to do fancy stuff with that. So she asks my advice on how to calm down. How do you calm down before a fight? How do you calm down before a tournament? Now, that's a great question. I would say I'm not a naturally calm person in that regard. It's something I've had to work and struggle to overcome a lot. When I was younger, I had a crippling case of social anxiety. I could not appear in front of people. I could not talk to people. Being in front of a crowd was the most petrifying thing ever. Performing in front of a crowd, forget about it. And I remember when I was a little kid, I got this assignment to give a talk in church in front of the children's group. Just a little talk about a minute long. And I remember preparing for this talk, and I was actually really excited. It was a talk about something about the creation of the world and animals. I was really excited to talk about animals, about how God made the animals. And because I love animals, especially little kids love them. Anyway, I could go on about how much I loved animals all day, but I was excited. I wanted to give that talk. I wanted to tell everybody how I loved the animals and God made the animals, and that's great. And so I get up there, my little, 4-year-old self, all prepared to say this thing. It's in my mind, and I just freeze. I couldn't do it. I was like, why isn't it coming out of my mouth? What's happening? All these people are looking at me, and nothing's happening, and eventually I just sat down, really embarrassed. And that's one of my earliest childhood memories I actually remember, because it was traumatic. And some time later, many years later, I had this idea that this is ruining my life. Not being able to talk to people, not be able to do the things I want to do, or say the things I want to say, or speak to the people I want to speak to. It's crippling. And so I started to do everything I could, everything in my power, to put myself in that same situation again and again and again, where I was forced to face my greatest fear. What does that have to do with fighting? Well, everything. Everything, really. So I put myself out there. I started doing public speaking as much as I hated it. I started a YouTube account back when YouTube started, just so I could talk in front of a camera, because that was terrifying to me. I auditioned for plays. I auditioned for performance companies. I started dancing. I studied dance, modern dance, and ballet in college, and I ended up performing professionally. I auditioned for choirs and plays and so on. I started fighting professionally. That means in front of a crowd, a big crowd, with lights and cameras. And man, that step up from, amateur Taekwondo to professional kickboxing, it's an important step in the rule changes, but more so, what I found really affected me psychologically was the environment. Being in the ring instead of the open mat. Wearing just the boxing shorts instead of the uniform and the belt. And every little detail that was different caused anxiety. Now I'm going to tell you something. Your first 10 fights are going to suck. even the ones you win in dominant fashion, even the ones you feel good about. Sometime from now, you're going to look back on those and think, man, wow, I've come so far since then. Now, they're going to suck for a lot of reasons. One, because you will surpass that skill level by leaps and bounds. And two, they'll also suck because the experience of anxiety sucks. And that is something we need to get used to. We need to condition ourselves for it exactly the same way we need to condition ourselves for any other aspect of combat sports. Yesterday in the gym, we were doing some clinch sparring, some very traditional Muay Thai training where we would clinch and practice throwing knees and whatnot. And, it's fairly light contact stuff we were doing, but light contact knees to the ribs, if you're not breathing correctly, still hurt. But if you're breathing correctly, pss, 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 you'll be fine. But I'm going to tell you something. One thing that is probably the most difficult to teach people to do, besides teaching them to actually punch and hit and kick and hurt other humans, because that's tough. That's one of the most difficult things to teach. The most difficult thing I've found to teach is breathing, exhaling. Letting the air out. See, the body breathes in by itself. That is automatic. If it wasn't for that, we would suffocate in our sleep. But we have conscious control over the breath that comes out. That includes aspirating. It includes words, and voice. There is an intrinsic connection between the mind, the body, and the breath. There's a very misunderstood concept in martial arts, qi, breath, or air in Chinese, just breath or air. I know a lot of people think it's like mystic magic or whatever. It's just breathing. It is controlling your breath, controlling your breathing, connecting your movement with your breath. Because we move the way that we breathe. What does that have to do with that Thai boxing drill? Well, you throw a knee, you exhale violently. You take a knee, you exhale violently. Why? Because that forces your abdominals to contract and get rigid so that they can withstand the pressure of an oncoming knee strike without damaging your internal organs or breaking your ribs. And ever watch a Thai boxing match? A high-level professional one? Those guys just kick the crap out of each other. And they walk away alive without broken ribs or anything. How did they do that? Well, years of conditioning, obviously, but years of conditioning themselves to breathe correctly. Now, fights, that's one thing. If you're training for a sparring match and you're nervous about that, that's normal, that's natural. If you are not nervous going into a fight, well, you don't know what a fight is. But you know what a fight is. Because you're nervous, right? You feel those nerves. You're like, oh man, we're going to get in there and we're going to kick each other. And there's potential danger there. So that is a legitimate fear. And that's the weird thing about sport fights versus, say, street fights. Street fights are spontaneous. You don't have that huge buildup of anxiety like, oh man, the fight's this weekend, the fight's in a month or 2 months, I got to do this training camp. And the closer you get to that fight, the more the heart starts racing and you stay up at night and you're like, oh man, And then you actually get in the fight and, throw those first few punches or kicks or whatever, and then you're like, okay, it's just a fight. It's not the end of the world. So, your first 10 fights, that's 10 in Chinese, that's also 10 in Chinese, sign language. Your first 10 fights are going to suck. That's why I recommend anybody planning on professional fighting, get 10 amateur fights under your belt. And that doesn't necessarily mean 10 MMA fights or whatever sport you're training for. It can be any type of fights, taekwondo matches, judo matches, wrestling matches, whatever. Just put yourself in front of people doing some type of combat sport at least 10 times before you even think about getting in a ring or a cage and doing something professional. Why? Because conditioning yourself for that anxiety is imperative. So I think that is awesome that you are doing another tournament, especially when you already know it's going to make you nervous. Because courage, my friends, is not experiencing fear. Courage is experiencing that fear and saying, so what? I will rise to the occasion and I will do it anyway. You're already courageous, my friend. Take courage in that. Don't forget to breathe. Don't forget to breathe, man. Let it out. When we're nervous, what happens to our breath? Our heart starts to race. We start to hyperventilate. And so our body follows suit because we move the way that we breathe. What is that? It's nervous energy carried through my heart, carries over into my breathing, and it carries over into my movement. So control the breath. Why do we do the ki up in Taekwondo? Ki up! What is that for? I mean, I've heard a lot of different explanations. It's to frighten people, it's to focus your energy, whatever. It's breathing. It's audibly breathing. It is focusing and projecting your breath outward so that your body moves the same way that you breathe. Now, forms are really interesting. Form competitions, to me, because that's a very different dynamic. I would say in a lot of ways it's much more difficult. It's a much more difficult type of competition, to me, than sparring or fighting, and I'll tell you why. Now, even though you're not going to get punched and kicked and hurt in forms competition, the subjective nature of it makes it difficult. Because you can do your very best interpretation of the forms or whatever it is, and somebody else, the judge, might not see it that way. They might think, whatever. Or the judge might have seen like 50 different forms already and be like, oh man, I want to go home. And just slug through it and dial in their decision. Hopefully not. Hopefully they're present. So it's very subjective, and I really don't like having to depend on somebody else's decision for my success. Which is why I love combat sports more than any other type of competition, because it puts the ball in your court. It allows you to be the one who decides. I mean, yes, there is another person trying to make that decision too, but you have power and control. You have a measure of power and control. You have a say. You have a vote in that fight. And when I was dancing is such a competitive field, man. Especially when you get into the game late like I did. Man, I started dancing at the age of 24. And my competition, they started dancing when they were babies. And I was playing catch-up, and that was tough. Trying to break into professional ballet or modern dance in your 20s. In a great twist of irony, Martha Graham, one of the pioneers of modern dance, started at age 24, exactly the same as I did. But the judgments are subjective, meaning it's up to somebody else's opinion to decide if it's good or not. And I remember going to so many auditions being really nervous, like, oh man, what if my performance isn't good enough? I'm nervous, I'm shaking, I'm not breathing right. You know, I don't feel good up here or right here, and so it's not going to look good when I perform it. And when I felt that way, I didn't make the auditions. Here's something about subjective criteria. I said before when talking about relationships that whoever cares less in a relationship has the power there. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't care about the people you're in relationships with. Absolutely not. But as far as a performer and a judge, there's a relationship there. The judge, in theory, has the power, and the performer is like, please, please accept my performance. But I'm going to tell you, whoever cares more in that dynamic actually has less power. Whoever cares less about the outcome has more. And that might sound counterintuitive. Now, I'm not saying don't prepare and don't do the absolute best you possibly can. Always do the best you can. Always present the best that you can. But when you're out there performing in that subjective judgment situation, project invincibility. Project the idea you are the one in control. That is your performance, not theirs. It's not the judge's performance, that is yours. You lay your hands on those weapons, whatever they are. You hold them. They're an extension of your body. It's not just a tool, it's an extension of you, and you show that. And so when you move, breathe the way you want to move. And get your mind in a place where nobody else's opinion, except for yours, matters. And at the end, other people may or may not like what you show them. And accept that. A lot of my students come to me and they ask, how do I get over this nervousness about fighting? And I tell them, you have to accept the fact that you're going to die. What? I don't want to die. No. You're probably not going to die in a fight. You're probably not going to die at a Taekwondo tournament. You're probably not even going to die in a cage fight. But you have to accept your own mortality. You have to accept the fact, I am going to die. This is not permanent. And when you do that, when you realize this is ephemeral, this is for now, now this is happening, and later it won't. It's easier to let go of that nervousness. Let go of the nervousness that holds you back. Now be nervous. Hold on to the part of that that pushes you forward. Because nervous energy has a purpose. It's a survival instinct. Right? In nature, when we sense danger, there's a fight coming up, we get nervous to fill us with nervous energy, to cause adrenaline to start pumping, so that we can move faster and hit harder and run away or beat the opposition or whatever it is that we need to do in that situation. That's why we experience that nervous energy. So channel it, harness it, bridle it. Heard the phrase, bridle all your passions? A bridle, it's the thing we stick on a horse not to subjugate the horse, but to ask it to move in a certain way. The horse is a wild animal, essentially, but we domesticate it, we tame it by asking it to cooperate, to ask it to help us, instead of buck us off. And nervous energy, our own body, it's that horse. So we're not going to lock our passions and our energy and our nervousness up in a cage and pretend it doesn't exist. We will embrace it. We will harness it. We will bridle it so that it can help us. All right, I hope that helps. Good luck in your tournament. You're going to do awesome, I know it. Thanks for watching. Get out there and train.